I'm going to start recording.
All right.
We're rolling, and I'll let you know when we're going live. I believe Jacob is going to signal me. We're live.
We are live. Hello, YouTube. Hey, everyone. Welcome to Wisecrack Edition Extra, or Wisecrack Extra Edition, depending on who you ask, because we still haven't figured it out yet. Today, I'm joined by one of our writers and researchers, Rebekah Sinclair. Hello, Rebekah.
Hi, Jared. Great to be here.
Great to finally meet you. And today, we're talking about NIER AUTOMATA, which is a video that she wrote and researched, which is actually one of my favorite videos of the year. So thank you for doing such an awesome job.
Thanks.
So when I say nice to meet you, what does that mean? Well, I've never met Rebekah. This is the first time. She's actually here for spring break because, well, why don't you just tell me, Rebekah, who are you? What is your life like? And, give us a little bit of introduction about yourself. And tell me about, I know that you're a gamer, you're a painter, and what else?
Jeez. So
give me the whole story in about 20 seconds.
Yeah. Okay. So when I was born, so I am right now at the University of Oregon, mostly just reading science fiction. But when I'm not reading science fiction or gaming, I am getting a PhD in philosophy.
Oh, okay.
So that is what brings me here. I really like doing critical thinking about philosophy. I do a lot of teaching of sort of some of the same properties that we cover.
Yeah.
Games and media and movies and stuff. I'm teaching a science fiction class next quarter, for example, which will cover some of the stuff that we talked about on this channel.
Oh, cool.
So, so that's why I'm here. I mean, I love your stuff, and I teach some stuff that's similar.
Our stuff.
It is our stuff. You're so right. It is our stuff.
Yeah.
So
for those of you just joining, just want to let you guys know, this is Wisecrack Edition Extra. What is Wisecrack Edition Extra? It is a extra podcast in which I interview the writers and researchers of the videos that we do. Our videos take a long time to research, a long time to produce, and we put a lot of hard work into it. So this is actually a Patreon-only exclusive in which I talk to these and interview these writers. So if you're watching it on YouTube Live right now, I recommend going to wisecrackplus.com so that you can hear more of my interviews and get more in-depth discussions of some of the videos that we make. So today we're going to be talking more about NIER AUTOMATA. So first, how did you hear about the game? Did you play the first NIER? And I believe you pitched the idea to me, right? Because I believe you had either started playing or had heard about NIER AUTOMATA when I said that, hey, let's do another video game video.
Yes, I was basically begging to play NIER for a really long time. So I have a friend that I play video games with, and he's brilliant. He has curated basically like these wonderful games that he thinks are the most philosophical and cool and interesting.
Oh.
Yes. And so we play them together. And so, yeah, Jeff and I, basically, he suggested that we play NIER. He was like, I know this game is going to it's going to blow you out of the water. You'll really, really, really love it.
And this is the first one.
This is actually NIER AUTOMATA. I didn't play NIER. Yeah,
oh, okay.
It came out. I would like to. I really, really would like to.
Okay.
But this is and so I think there are actually a lot of connections between the first and the second that would have been really philosophically profound and interesting to have included. But our video was already like pretty long.
Yeah,
and
it's
it covered
already
basically half the philosophers in the Western canon. So I thought like maybe we can leave that for the next video.
I mean, having said that, like I've also played the game, and I think you did an amazing job. What could have been like a 2-hour-long video, I think you did a really good job breaking down basically the gist of it. My first question is, so most of our video focuses on Nietzsche, and I'm curious did you see that connection before when the character Pascal said, what is Pascal's reading a book? Are we to assume that it's a particular book? And when you heard Pascal say, wow, this Nietzsche is a really profound thinker, was that when the light bulb went off? And do you think that it's a lot of times when we do Wisecrack stuff, like we are taking ideas that are either deliberately or spontaneously parallel to the ideas of thinkers. But in this one, it really seems that they are baiting us with a particular reading through the lens of a particular philosopher.
Yeah.
And I guess, did you see that deliberate notion before Pascal said that? Or when he said that, were you just like, okay, I get it, the game is Nietzschean?
No, like the very beginning of the game, right, the first thing that really happens is that 2B gives this like wonderful little speech, right, about being able to kill God, asking if we can kill the gods that made this terrible world. And right away, right, like whenever any of us hear killing God or God is dead or something, like all of us are kind of triggered. We think, okay, of course, that's Nietzsche. But then it didn't take much long after that to realize that the whole game's premise is about escaping the meaning that has been set out for us and kind of creating our own meaning, which is basically the kind of Nietzschean existential theme.
Sure.
And so right from the very beginning, I thought this is clearly going to be an HDN game. And then, of course, when Pascal references Nietzsche explicitly, I was like, well, okay, I'm so glad to know I was right. But
I was really happy to find that clip because we just put it at the very beginning of the video as kind of like a primer. It's like, oh, this is a deliberate.
It's totally deliberate. Yeah, and they say stuff like killing God over and over again. I mean, they basically use words like straight out of Nietzsche several times throughout the game.
Yeah. So with a game that's so dense, and also let me know, how many of the endings did you get? How adamant were you on like, quote unquote, completing the game?
Yeah. Well, I will say that we didn't do a lot of the side quest stuff.
Sure.
We started to do some of them, and then it just became clear that, right, like I was doing this in part for my own fun and satisfaction and enjoyment and self-actualization, but also because I was, going to be prepping a script. And
got deadlines, people.
I've got deadlines. I'm also getting a PhD, which is like hard. So I was like, okay, so we did a few, and then I realized quite quickly that we were going to have so much content to cover, and that the main sort of thrust of the game was already so rich and so dense that we probably. So there were a few things we ended up adding into the video that from side quests, like certain battles with an Angles bot or that sort of thing that kind of made it in. But mostly we just kind of pushed through. So I watched, I think, 6 endings.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I think the original draft of the script was actually quite a bit longer. I want to know what from the video were you sad did not make it into the final cut, or just ideas that you had that necessarily weren't in the original draft, but ideas that you would have liked to have included.
So that's a really great question. So, I mean, how long do you have really of here? But
how much time you got?
Yeah, but so I think the one that I would really that kind of comes to mind first is with Simone de Beauvoir. So Simone de Beauvoir kind of popularized this idea of the one and the other, right? And so she talks about this idea of othering. The othering is something that you kind of do. Any group of people can basically other another group of people for any reason whatsoever. We're in this room, everybody else is out there. That makes them the others and us. Right. And this is kind of a basic thing that you just evolutionarily kind of acquired. But it becomes really bad when you start to kind of create violent conflicts out of this, the one and the other. When you start to create ideologies that say, now this one is a sort of natural group that should be together all the time, and that group is an other and they're less than, and, not as human, or in this case, not as android or whatever. And this is a really central point of contention for Beauvoir. She compares this to the male and female relationships, that the men have been understood as the one, and the women are kind of a deviation from this norm from the other, right? And so you get that a little bit in her like boss battle, right? As she's we talked about gender in the video, but there was this other component of othering individuals that is really, really explicit throughout the game in this relationship between the androids and the machines, where the androids are basically othering and creating these whole ideologies about why it is the case, these justifications for why these machines are so killable or so expendable. Mm-hmm. And I really regret not having included that, because it's so obvious that that's part of it. And also I really thought Beauvoir is I think she's an often underplayed character in philosophy in general, and she's clearly so central to some of that game's themes. I wish I would have added that in.
Well, I mean, another thing I want to ask, so I played the game, and at a certain point, it got, I don't know if you agree, it got really tedious.
Absolutely. Incredibly mind-numbingly tedious.
There is one part, and I can't remember between which ending you're trying to get, but there's a part where you're playing as, I believe it's 2B, and the game is glitching or something, or she's slowing down, or she's trudging along.
Totally.
And that was punishment. There would be parts where players would just throw you off the side of a cliff, and then you don't know how to get back up. It's glitching, and I couldn't help but think that it was deliberate, that the game was literally putting you through some sort of existential slump. And that it was deliberately trying to make you to suffer.
Yes.
So did you get that impression, and what do you think about that? Do you think that did it piss you off, or were you just oh, I see what they're doing, this is clever, and I'm appreciating the notion?
Yeah, that's something that's really interesting with gaming in general, right? There are lots of these moments where you think, oh, I see what they're trying to do. Okay, now I've got it, but I still have to play 45 minutes of this, and I don't know that I want to do that.
But I would argue that games don't. I think most games these days are just trying to, start, Dark Souls definitely started something in that challenging content is now in again.
Yes.
And I think it probably was started a little bit before Dark Souls, but I think it's rare that it's actually done for some sort of philosophical point.
That might be. Although I was just playing The Last Guardian, which everybody should be playing. It's a fantastic game. And there's a relationship between a young boy and a creature named Trico. And you build this relationship over the course of the whole game. And it's a very slow game. And you have to do the same stuff like again and again and again for hours and hours and hours. But the point is really to build this relationship between these two individuals. And you don't get that if you hadn't labored through all of that stuff. So, but to your point about NIER Automata, I think for sure part of the sort of existentialist, or often what comes up to mind when we think about existentialism is sort of thinking about tedium and thinking about boredom and thinking about, right, like this trudge through life that is not always pleasant, that is often actually mostly dull and completely quotidian and not very interesting and sometimes explicitly frustrating, and that is something that you have to continue to say yes to, right, like to continue with our Nietzschean theme. If you want to continue with the game, if you want to like move forward at all, you have to be like, you know, F it, we're going to go for it. Yeah. Let's just push through this and see what happens.
What a ballsy thing to do,
so,
right?
Yeah, it's very
Because you can't imagine that most people playing the game are, you know, saying like, oh, this is really boring and difficult and frustrating, but so is life.
Yeah,
you know? Like, who's going to say that? You know, unless you're a philosophy PhD student. You know?
You're right. Although I will say that as I was kind of doing my research and looking around, the gaming communities, they totally got this. I mean, like the serious gamers really, really already, maybe before our video, already really appreciated this game for its philosophical punch, and especially parts like that found them to be really profound. So good on y'all.
Yeah, absolutely, good on y'all. When I was playing the game, I was like nervous. I was like, oh my God, like there's so much going on. There's so many questions. One of the things that we didn't touch on that I thought was really interesting is just the way that they kind of visualize subjectivity with those little like what I call Galaga moments. You know what I'm talking about, with like the little triangle that's like shooting the things. I always thought that was really interesting in how like whenever it's almost playable consciousness is kind of how I interpreted it, you know, and like even when like isn't it there are parts in the game where 9S it's always 9S, right? He gets shut down or you know experiences something like that, and then like we see the flicker of consciousness come back as you move the triangle through it. I always thought that was super interesting, and I regretted that we never got to talk about it, but I mean Jesus, it could be an hour-long video, but who's going to watch that? And who's got the? Ain't nobody got time for that.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. I actually really did love those little those moments where he's like hacking. Yeah. I thought that was a really unique and interesting and very unusual game dynamic.
How do you draw the line between this is deliberately making me suffer to make a philosophical point, and then this is just fucking annoying? Because like for example, I think the part that we're talking about where 2B is literally just stumbling through and you don't even know what you're supposed to be doing.
No, you don't. And it's glitching, and you think like, oh, is this my station, or is this like the game itself? Like, what's happening? Yeah.
But then, I mean, I thought some of the most challenging parts, and my girlfriend and I were playing the game, and I think we put it down for like 2 weeks because some of these hacking challenges were just so annoying.
Yeah.
Do you draw the line where it's like, okay, so this is meant to kind of hold a mirror up to our existential condition, and this is just a game being annoying?
Yeah.
When you're an existential game, do you just get to get away with, like, at a certain point, is it like, oh, well, because this is thematically relevant, we can get away with annoying gameplay?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do feel like there were times where I wanted to put the game down, or you know, at some point it felt like, oh my gosh, are we still fighting these thing beings? Like you're forcing. I know these creatures shouldn't be killed because they have consciousness, but you're still like forcing me to do that in order to move forward in the game. And so I actually find that most games have things that I feel really antagonistic about that make me want to put them down. And I know, and that's sort of like the power of interactive games, right? That they force you to go through these things that you don't like or that you might not want to do in order to get to the end. And it's only once you get to the end, right, that then you get to make a claim about whether or not the game was worth it or not. And in the middle of it, like in the middle of life, you know, you're not like, you can't really make a claim about whether or not it was worth it or not worth it, right? You're still just kind of trudging through.
Right.
And so only really once I got to the end that I was able to look back and say, yeah, actually, that now that I see the whole picture and it's come together, I would be totally willing to do all of that again in order to kind of like have that experience.
Yeah. So, did you first of all, did you delete your save, and did you start over?
Yes, and I cried through the whole thing. It was cool. It was the most beautiful, like this. Yeah, I mean, I kind of knew the ending was coming because my friend Jeff had told me about it. Nevertheless, as soon as it started, I mean, I was just I was so overcome by the intention that they put into this and by the feelings they were clearly trying to elicit from the players. I think I very rarely feel so intentionally like focused on, right, as part of a game where someone's saying, I need you to feel empathy and I need you to feel compassion like right now, very intensely.
Yeah.
And then, we watched as all of our shit got deleted and we were like, okay, here we go again.
It reminds me of, are you a House of Cards fan?
Yes.
You remember in season 2, there's that sand mandala?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's I'm always thinking about that. And so basically, if you guys aren't familiar with House of Cards, there's a sand mandala. These Buddhist monks are, with painstaking detail, spending weeks creating this beautiful, intricate thing. And then at the end, when it's done, they just throw it away. It's like this ritual to, and you could say, yes saying, which, and once again, Buddhist philosophy is much more of an Easter thing, which brings me to my next question I want to talk about. So toward the end of the game, the bosses take on more Eastern philosopher names. So you mentioned like Zhuangzi, for example. Do you think that there's a specific relevance to the fact that the Asian or the Eastern philosophers are, I mean, they're all just robots, right? But like one of the most challenging semi-final bosses is one of the main robots that are all these Eastern philosophy names. Is there relevance, you think, into that we're mostly inundated with Western philosophers up until you get close to the end of the game, and then there are these like Eastern philosopher final battles?
Oh, that's really interesting. I don't know what to think about that.
Well, one thing that you brought up in the video that I thought was interesting is and this is actually one of my favorite, just from a writing perspective, is how we were mostly focusing on Nietzsche, and then when we start talking about Zhuangzi, we're also like, so you can see a similar discipline in how they talk about cycles.
Yeah.
So do you think that there is more of because the ending is still Nietzschean, the yes saying is still Nietzschean, but is there an overlap between that idea of yes saying in the face of a perhaps unfulfilling existence that is also in Eastern philosophy, or that is perhaps even more present in Eastern philosophy?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, and we have this in plenty of other videos, like the Matrix video, right? So they're all of these, and they were doing it before it was cool, like before Nietzsche came along, right? This has been going on for thousands of years in that philosophy. It's really, and it's even kind of built into a lot of Eastern cultures. So I don't know if it was significant that it happened, like you had to fight those people at a certain time. But what I do think was really interesting is that you had this game that brought together the Western canon, so to speak, right, and the Eastern canon, and said, this theme of suffering is a human kind of condition. It's something that everybody who's playing this game is going to be experiencing. And so here are some philosophers that you're going to be familiar with, people who are playing this, right, in Japan and China, and here are some people that you're going to be familiar with, Western thinkers, right, and no matter where you are in the world, these individuals are going to be powerful influences of our culture and powerful influences over the way that we think and shape our lives and our identities. And so to bring those together in the game and say, all of you, everybody playing this is your figures are kind of part of this game and they mean something to us and we've shaped the game around their philosophy, I think is a really beautiful way to bring folks together.
So when I was playing the game, and I believe when I started playing the game, I had already seen either your outline or your research. Yeah. And I'm curious, there are some of the philosophy bosses like the Jean-Paul, or he's not a boss, but he's a character who very clearly, who's very clearly, a mouthpiece for some of the philosophies of Jean-Paul Sartre. I think we can see that also with the de Beauvoir boss. Yeah. There are some, though, and when I was playing the game, I was looking for relevance in every single one. Did you have a similar frustration? Were you always trying to say, like, what is Engels about this Engels boss? What is? Yeah. I think that the ones that we pointed out in the video, which is like Kierkegaard, Pascal, de Beauvoir, and I guess Jean-Paul, I think all of those work. But in general, at some point where you just kind of like, all right, now they're just name dropping.
I never thought that.
Okay.
But I might just be taking the philosophy too seriously.
No, not at all.
So, like Engels, right, for example, is a boss. You think like, okay, what? He's just this like large sort of construction-y boss, right? But Marx and Engels write in Critique of Capitalism and critique of the ideology that capitalism produces. And here's this being whose basically whole function is as a constructor, right? Like somebody who's continuing to make stuff and to push the system along, right? And to repair stuff. And so I thought even if it was just in very subtle ways, like there wasn't much otherwise about the Engels spot that I thought, oh, that's just screams Engels. But definitely even just the sort of shape or figure or where you find them or that sort of thing was really clearly very intentional.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
What about like the Schlegel brothers and like, you know, like are some, because I you know, at some point in the video we were just like, all right, well, we can't break down all of these, so here are some other ones.
Yeah, the Schlegel
and
brothers.
We even got some comments. They're like, can you make another video that like breaks down every single one?
Can we?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I mean, I guess I didn't quite get that from Engels, but it makes sense now that you mention. I guess that I was always looking for something to be as explicit as Jean-Paul saying existence precedes essence, or de Beauvoir turning from a regular robot to this kind of feminine-looking thing.
Yeah.
That I thought was very clear, and I love the whole Kierkegaard being a religious cult with them taking leaps of faith. I thought that was really cool. Let's talk about, so you mentioned earlier a little thing about gender, and I think one of the most interesting things about gender in this game is that why are Adam and Eve both dudes? Or are they even dudes? Don't they like not have any junk or something?
They're theys.
They're theys.
Yeah, they're
okay.
theys,
And then Pascal has a woman's voice through...
Yeah.
Is it all of the game or just most of the game?
I think it's all of the game.
All of the game. Yeah, so what do you think about that?
Yeah, the game did some interesting and troubling stuff with gender, right? So you can, first of all, like the female characters, right, like A2 and 2B, are very sort of sexualized in their presentation.
But that's like a JRPG trope.
It
right?
is a PG trope, yeah. But that doesn't make it less troubling, or sort of less strange to witness that, especially in a game that has this piece about, you know, Beauvoir is like a central character, and so
yeah, and that's why I'm curious. How do we reconcile the two? You know, by the way, do you know there's a trophy you can get if you look up 2B's skirt 30 times?
Yeah. Did you get that trophy, Jared?
My girlfriend told me about it, and I played the whole game with my girlfriend, so no.
Okay. Good for you.
I mean, yeah, of course I didn't get that trophy.
Yeah, that's what you should have been.
You check out my PSN name.
Because my girlfriend was playing with me. Yeah, but I do think, because the other things are also sort of like the gender of Adam and Eve. It's also kind of anime, right? Like there's a lot of... fiction, like Japanese fiction, right, where the characters are more gender neutral, or they take on feminized kind of affect in some way. And so I think there's a lot of play with gender in Japanese culture generally, and in some of their literatures and like manga and these sorts of things, right? So I think in that sense, it sort of fits right in, and it doesn't really, like, it might not stand out as much to like a Japanese audience as it does to a Western audience. We're still like, we don't deal well with gender mixing, and we're still like really, trying to figure some stuff out with regard to that. So, so I do think that they were definitely trying in a certain way to trouble some of those binaries, but male and female binaries, or to trouble kind of maybe even how we feel when we're looking at certain characters. Our ability to read them as male or female or this sort of thing. But also I think it just kind of fits with a lot of the Japanese culture in general. So
Real quick, for those of you joining us right now on YouTube, I just want to let you guys know what we're doing right now. It's Wisecrack Edition Extra. This is a Patreon-only podcast that we make that is basically further developing and building on Wisecrack editions that we make. So for most of our Wisecrack Edition catalog, or at least for a lot of it, if you go to Patreon, if you go to wisecrackplus.com, and if you join up, then you can hear some more of our breakdowns, our further explorations of these games that we spend, games, movies, TV shows that we spend a lot of time studying. So anyway, Rebekah, I wanted to ask, so in our channel, and I feel like just in the general discourse of our culture in general, existentialism does seem to be more universal. If you look at, like, everyone knows that our most popular property to cover is Rick and Morty, a show that's all about existentialism, absurdism, voids of meaning, and there's NIER AUTOMATA. What is it that you think that is happening today in our lives that is making existentialism mainstream? And do you think that this is the first time that it's ever become kind of a mainstream thing?
I don't think it's the first time that it's become kind of a mainstream thing. I think it's been really popular for youthful generations, or the youth of a generation, right?
But hasn't been explored explicitly in media. I mean, perhaps like youth. I mean, I'm playing devil's advocate here,
but not by being a function of the media, right? Like we have more media than we did when we were like in the '60s. So when you were reading Nietzsche in the '60s, you weren't having like Wisecrack YouTube videos explaining the game that allowed it to be possible or something. So that might in part be a function of the media. I think that existentialism is, frankly, it's just a very seductive kind of philosophy, because who hasn't felt like, what the fuck am I doing here? What is the meaning of all this? I don't really like what my parents had to say, or like where the kind of path of my culture is going, and so I'm going to try and find alternative meaning. Right, these are things that seem to be a product of just like growing up and right having differences with people and trying to figure out how to make life meaningful in general. So existentialism puts this really kind of at the pop level, right? Gives a name to that and says like what you're thinking makes sense, and also a lot of smart people have thought about it before. But I think in general existentialism is supposed to be a much more profound critique of society and of norms and of national direction and social and capitalist direction, and I don't think that is popular necessarily. So I think in this kind of pop way that like everybody kind of feels that we should dig into our meaning and try to make sense of our lives and kind of threaten these confines around us, that's pretty cool, but from that we should be able to make a much more profound and radical critique of the troubling things that we've inherited, which is really Nietzsche's point, right? That we really actually need to kill our gods and kill capitalism or kill these gender norms or kill these things that are really pretty violent that we just accept as part of our daily lives, and that is where we should go kind of with this existentialism.
Do you think that the way that so first of all, the way I kind of think of it is there's almost like this sense of opportunism. I think that that media is like BoJack, like Rick and Morty, is that they see that this is a cultural trend and that they can speak to people. They can speak to people's sense of humor. I guess I'm curious as to why. First of all, okay, so do you think NIER Automata is different than something like Rick and Morty in that is it a more productive existential critique than something like Rick and Morty or BoJack?
Well, I actually do think that Rick and Morty is a productive critique.
Okay.
I think I don't think you have to treat it like that. You could do readings of it that are just kind of analyzing this sort of pop jokey kind of existentialism. But I also think that there are really serious aspects of it that are trying to be quite critical of the meaning-making apparatuses. So in that way, I don't know that necessarily I'd say that NIER Automata is more serious than that. Although they're definitely not trying to plug it with like fun and But
NIER Automata definitely, it takes meaning away and then dares you to rebuild meaning. Yeah. Whereas I feel like Rick and Morty, it's just like it's a reoccurring gag that we strip meaning away, and then like the gag is that meaning is never reestablished. I feel like it's much more kind of rebellious, or what's the word I'm looking for?
Serious.
Which I think is one of the profound things about NIER Automata is that whereas most other media that deals with existentialism is just trying to disillusion you and then give you that sense of disillusion gratification that everyone gets from watching Adam Ruins Everything or Cinema Sins or whatever you like getting disillusioned from. But I feel like NIER Automata will disillusion you and then at least attempt to give you an answer as to how to deal with this disillusionment.
You're right.
Whereas Rick Sanchez is never going to rebuild meaning.
Yeah, you're right. But so I will say then that I think that Rick and Morty can be profound in the sense that the way that they perform their critique and the sorts of things that they critique are maybe a bit deeper than just a kind of youthful frustration with your parents' path and like finding meaning in your life. So I think you can mine those lessons out of there, but they sure as hell don't give you anything like positive at the end of it. And that's like kind of part of the joke of the show. You're right; it's part of its gig. And I mean, I guess I talked about like crying at the end of NIER Automata because they do precisely try to reestablish some kind of meaning. And now I don't know that that's an existentialist meaning per se. Like I'm not sure that their end point, which sort of has to do with like empathy and community, that's not necessarily where where like the majority of the existentialists that we mentioned in the show
would want to take
that.
But so you would say Nietzschean yes saying is not an existential.
That is, but
okay.
I mean, with regard to we end the video talking about empathy,
right?
Not a Nietzschean point, like even a little bit.
Okay.
We talk a lot about community, right? And you getting the help from people from all over the world, right? And this really, that's what makes it compelling. So there is the yes saying where you have to say, all right, just delete my shit because I would rather sacrifice myself and help someone else and say yes to all this stuff over again. But then we also highlight that's a real communal act, an affirmation of other human lives and of community. And you could read Nietzsche as saying some of that stuff, but you could also read Nietzsche as not saying that. There's a pretty clear divide in Nietzschean literature about that, actually. So in that sense, I'm not sure that what they're getting, aside from the yes saying, but the empathy and compassion and stuff is super existential, or you'd have to maybe take Beauvoir and her like post-feminist sort of thinkers. They're definitely saying some of that stuff, but...
One of the really interesting things about the video that I liked is the discussion about Nietzsche's critique of ideas of progress.
Yes.
And, you know, progress seems to mean something very specific in today's kind of modern discourse. What does Nietzsche mean specifically that, like, because in the game, we are doing the same missions over and over again. We are, we're doing this, we're doing the same stuff over and over again. We don't have a specific purpose. I guess in the game, what is the progress that is the... So I guess the progress that Nietzsche is criticizing is that, oh, okay, so we just finished one ending, we're going again, therefore we're making progress, right? And he's saying that, no, you're not making... Why don't I'll just let you say it.
The progress, like we talk about it today in the sense of like progressive, right? Basically assumes a set of values that we all hold to be dear that we're trying to get closer and closer and closer toward.
Okay.
So that assumes a shared foundation and assumes a set of given principles and ideals. And what Nietzsche wants to do is be critical of how we come to these shared principles or ideals. Like where the fuck do we get this idea that, you know, like that all human life is meaningful, or that everybody needs to be equal, or all of these things? Where do those ideas even come from? Because we can't really proceed in a meaningful way until we've truly interrogated these ideas basically in their fullest and kind of unpacked them, and because they often hide really crappy stuff within them, right? Or they come from really troubling places that we might want to say, like, actually we want to distance ourselves from that a bit. So rather than just taking these ideas and moving forward with them. So that's how we typically think of being like progressive or moving toward progress. And in the game, I think Nietzsche they lay this Nietzschean theme over top of the game by dismantling this idea that you are actually able to progress in a linear fashion, and to say, like, most people when you start a game, you have basically a shared set of ideals, like, well, like, I want to get from A to B, and I want A to B to make a lot of sense, and then after B, I don't want to move back to A. Guess what I want to do? I want to move to C, and then I want to move to D, and I'm basically going to be operating under this premise that the goal is to take what I've inherited from A and move it to B, and then what I've inherited from B and move it to C, right? And move along this projected course that the game makers have laid out. And in this Nietzschean game, they fuck all that up. Because
by doing that structure in a Nietzschean way, they're forcing you to question: is just because I am moving closer to the quote unquote end of the game, does that mean that it's progress?
Does that mean it's progress? Yes. Or like, what have I even achieved in this point? Because after every ending, you kind of realize, like, oh, now I have to kill this guy again, or actually, you know, the meaning that I made during this game that I was going to be like killing these robots, that's really messed up down, because those robots are actually sentient and I shouldn't be killing them, but I have to keep killing them because now, so they sort of they shift everything, and in that way you don't end the game thinking, oh, I've moved from A, you know, to Z and I have this clear line of progress. Instead you think, what have I accomplished during this game? I've killed all of my characters, you know, and everything that I thought was important, I've killed all them too. And, you know, so it just feels like you get to the end and you haven't really actually achieved anything in the way that you usually achieve something in games. Although apparently you get a trophy for some skirt looking or something. But, you know, otherwise, aside from those trophies, not much.
Right. Yeah. Are you a BioShock fan? Have you played the first one?
No. Okay, I mean, not that I'm not a fan, but I'm familiar with it, yeah.
So this idea is kind of reminding me of the thing that happens at the end when Andrew Ryan basically reveals that you've been pulled by a string, you know? You know, where he says that, like, a man chooses, a slave obeys. And basically he's calling you out for just following the voice of Atlas, who says, would you kindly,
I love it.
You know, would you kindly just open this box, or would you kindly go through this corridor? So you're, and in the same way, although in BioShock it's a literal voice that is tempting you toward quote unquote progress.
Yes.
In NIER Automata, it is, it's not necessarily a voice telling you what to do, but it's the very nature of you wanting to, quote unquote, finish a game.
Exactly.
And that when you finish a game, there be some sort of heightened sense of meaning of, oh, I've you know, but
I've achieved something. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And usually that's like some sort of epiphany in an ending, you know? In most narrative-based games, you want to reach the ending because you want to know what happens. And not only do you want to know what happens, but usually there's some sense of salvation for the main character. If they have a conflict that's introduced in the first act, it's resolved, or there's some sort of paradigm shift in the last act. There's nothing like that.
There's nothing like that, yeah.
In this or in BioShock.
In fact, the bots even say, maybe these guys are going to wake up and do it all over again. Right. And you're like, no, oh my God, what?
Right. Yeah. What an interesting game. How are we doing on time, Jacob? Or whoever's over there?
We've got 35 minutes.
Okay, cool. Do you have a favorite part of the game?
Well, I loved the ending, obviously. But I really love, yes, I do. I love that part where you're beginning the second opening. We talk about this a little bit in the video with the brothers.
Right. With the red shirt thing.
The red shirts.
Yeah.
So, right, you've just finished this ending, and you've realized that the machines are sentient, and also that that the aliens are no longer there, right? So now you know that their strings are cut, proverbially, and there are these real whole beings that are trying to make a life for themselves in the absence of their gods. And then you see this super sad scene with these two bots, one of which is presumably dead, or the machine equivalent, and the other one is trying to save them, and he keeps saying stuff like, "Brother, wake up, brother, please start breathing." And just the knowledge that the whole last playthrough was spent murdering these beings. I mean, they couldn't have done a better job to punctuate what a fuckhead you are for having done all that stuff, right?
Right.
Then by opening this playthrough with these beautiful beings mourning, right, the loss of a comrade, even though they don't mean anything, they're not important characters, and that's really crucial, right? That these beings are just nobodies, they're just like one or two of the random beings that you could have slaughtered, and it's right at that point that you sort of you see 2B flying in, right? So you can kind of see that overhead as the beings are mourning. So it's before you land on the planet, even before the game really started. You've returned in a sense before your first playthrough. And you see this super sad scene. I mean, oh my gosh, it just gutted me. It's so compelling.
I agree. I love that point in the video when you bring that up. I think it's a very precise crystallization of. Now, granted, I think that I'll finish one thought. It's a very precise crystallization of the idea that you think that you are progressing, or that there's meaning to your mission, in that you are killing these mindless, emotionless beings. And you finish a whole playthrough of the game thinking that you are making progress by doing that, and then it undercuts that by saying, no, these things aren't mindless. They are actually just as conscious as the androids, or even you as the player.
Oh, that's good. Yes, I like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. This happens.
No, that's okay. It does.
So. I know you said you haven't played the first one, but did your curiosity kind of take you to kind of read summaries or watch long plays or something? I know you do watch Let's Plays, right?
I do watch Let's Plays.
Okay, cool.
I really like them. Well, I don't have my own gaming consoles or anything, so I can only play on friends, with friends, or on friends' consoles, or I watch. Mm-hmm. So and also it's a nice thing to do when I'm taking a break from philosophy. And just
to play philosophy games.
Yeah, it's like my life is consumed by it.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I did become curious, and I did watch a bit, and I talked to several friends who had played it, and so there are some really interesting crossovers that I would have liked to talk about, including a lot of stuff with Devila and Popola. Remember those?
The two girls.
Yes.
I remember when I first saw them, I texted you and I was like, who are these people?
Yes. Yeah. And in order to really know who they are, you have to have played the first one. And so there was some other stuff with Yorha.
And so what is their function? Are they, it seems like they have some, are they like overlords? Do they have some, they're spectators? How do they fit into the God is dead reading at all?
It is my understanding, and I'm sure I'll be corrected immediately if I'm wrong on this, I believe that they were kind of more or less responsible for, how the humans are all dead, right?
Yeah.
They're responsible for that. So the humans were kind of all uploaded, and then somehow Davila and Popola in the first game are a bit responsible for their demise.
They killed the backups.
Yeah, they basically killed the backups, yeah.
Yeah.
So now I think they feel extra responsible for the well-being of the androids, whose mission they have kind of made moot. So that's why they show up in this game in these sort of savior roles, because I think they're trying to make up for, or to ease the fact that
they the characters that you? I'm not familiar with the first one at all. Are they the characters you play as in the first one?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I don't think so. And so I would have liked to talk a bit. I would like to play the game. If you will have me write about that, I will happily play that game.
Okay.
Yeah, because I really think it's worth it. And I think these two games fit together really well, especially with this kind of Nietzschean theme. I think to be able to first experience the death of the humans in the first one. So part of the reason why it was so impactful for me to watch this one without having seen the first one is because I was like, what? The humans are dead? That's crazy. You know, like, so I didn't know that. And it would have been a bit of a different experience had I known that. So I'm actually kind of happy that I did it in reverse. And now I can go back to the first one with an eye toward what is happening in the second one. And so the other thing I think would be cool to talk about is the whole Yorha. They get a much larger role in the first one, which I really haven't had a chance to explore. And in this one, they basically just seem like kind of cruel individuals that are still making these androids fight this war that doesn't even make sense anymore. And so they serve this really great Nietzschean point in the second one.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you know, you're like, why is Yorha even here? What are they doing? And the first one I think would explain a lot of that.
So can you connect that for me? So in the game, we are the androids are continuing to fight this proxy war, even though there's no meaning to it anymore. And so how would Nietzsche say that? What is the equivalent in our world of something like that? Like, give me an example.
Okay. Ooh, well, that's a tough one. So
like even if like after value systems are done, we don't just reset. I've seen the video too many times, so I think I've like memorized your words.
I was like, that does sound pretty much verbatim.
So for example, like correct me if I'm wrong. I'm just going to guess here.
Yeah.
So let's say that if you're a God is dead kind of person, but having said that, there are still things within our culture. Like, let's say I'm a lapsed Christian. Actually, you are a real lapsed Christian. But let's say that I am, and I no longer believe in the creed. I no longer believe in God, or like the value systems put forth by Him. But I might still turn the other cheek.
Yes.
Or I might still be nice to my neighbor. Is that a fair example?
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to stray away from using religious examples, but they would be the most immediate and obvious, given especially the direct parallel to, God. Mm-hmm. I think something that might be more apt are, like, think about race relations in the United States. So, right, they come from this history of slavery that basically generated the wealth that is the United States, right? That like allowed us to be what we are. And then we decided, okay, so that's not great. We should not enslave people, at least as explicitly as we did there. And we are kind of like trying to move on. But we still actually have a lot of cultural and social remnants of racism that are very, very, very prevalent today. But we don't see them because they don't look like explicit slavery, right? Like, nobody's actually in chains.
Right.
So we think, well, we've solved the problem, and now we've killed our God. We've killed this sort of like slavery and its role in our capitalist structure, and now we're better people. But we actually still have a lot of these things, and we're enforcing these on each other through very subtle systems of social meaning and through subtle infrastructure decisions and all that sort of thing. So this might be, a less clear or kind of muddier example, but still I think a very relevant one.
Well, then my question is it then that the death of God is like a scapegoat? If it's like, oh, well, God's dead, so we don't have to worry about Christianity anymore. Or, well, slavery's dead, so we don't have to worry about inequality anymore.
Well, I think for Nietzsche, you need to kill your gods, and then you need to attend to all this bullshit. You can't just kill your god and use it as a scapegoat and then be free of those problems, right? You need to actually like work through the muck and the mire that results from that. So, right, because his point is actually that even after you've killed this god that's on high, that's sort of enforcing this stuff kind of in this hierarchical relation, you still enforce these things on each other, so even after this relationship is gone. And so that's really what we need to be interrogating, the fact that we enforce these relations on one another, that we make kind of racial assumptions, right? Like that's not something that someone's telling us to do because they're like people that we think by law are slaves. That's something that we do because we're enforcing this kind of system of racial expectations on one another. And so that's the level of critique that we need to engage in. Once God is dead, you don't just say, well, God's dead, now we can have a party. Because God is dead, you have to engage in this very serious critique of what's happening in the now and the way that you enforce these sort of things on one another. So
this might be a bit of a tangent. I want to just get this one last philosophical point before we get back to the game. But one of our other contributors at Wisecrack, Austin, who's on our Show Me the Meaning podcast, which you all should definitely check out, as well as wisecrackplus.com, where you can hear more of these writer interviews. But he said that the way he would best describe postmodernism is taking serious the death of God. I don't know if that's ever something that you've heard of, and I definitely think that if we, I think it's fair to say that NIER Automata is a postmodern game. I mean, simply because it deconstructs the meta-narrative of there even being an ending that we strive for. And yeah, I guess I just wanted to hear if that resonates with you at all, and if that kind of informs how we think about how has, actually later today we're doing a movie podcast on Cabin in the Woods. And, we think about something like Deadpool.
I love that, yeah.
Do you see other trends in gaming with this similar kind of postmodern take that is a reaction to kind of the death of the grand narratives that we use to make sense of the world, or is this kind of like a big pioneer?
That's a good question. I mean, I think I'll just kind of echo what I said earlier. I feel like there are a lot of places that are trying to do it. Like, it is a very popular thing to do.
Yeah.
But I don't think that there are a lot of places that are doing that well.
I think that's kind of like more to my Rick and Morty question. Like, why is this so popular?
Okay, well, I mean, how do I do this? I feel like now I'm going to go into professor lecture mode. I think it's because, right, all of the systems that we have, they have not worked out the way that we want them to. Like, capitalism actually turns out that it fucks over more people than it helps, right? All of these systems in our lives are really bad. They don't turn out great for us. And so you end up in this place where everybody's increasingly disillusioned because the systems that we've told are going to free us, make us happy, give us all these things actually do not make us happy or free us or help us or do any of these things, right? And so then you end up in a bind where you actually have to think, okay, how am I making meaning for my life? And if it doesn't make sense, I really have to interrogate and move beyond that. And I think we're in a really ripe period for that realization when these systems are really coming to like a profound crisis, and that we are the generation that is having to wrestle with what that means for our lives. And as the sort of this narrative about America or like whatever it is, right, that's coming to crisis, we got to deal with that. And existentialism is one way of framing what the problem is and trying to figure that out. So that's why I think it's very popular. But I don't know that everybody really does this in a super profound or philosophically sophisticated way.
Right.
So I think there are a lot of groups that are tapping into it because it makes them money, because people will watch it and love it.
And that's what I'm saying. Yeah. Like that's the trend that I see. I see Adam Ruins Everything, Cinema Sins, all these things.
Yes.
It's like people are disillusioned. I guess like and I have this conversation a lot with a lot of our contributors in terms of like, where is it? Is it capitalism specifically? The thing, at least in my personal life, where I see things like Rick and Morty and BoJack getting so popular is because, and maybe this is inherent to capitalism, but for me, I grew up a media junkie, and as a media junkie, there are certain images that you're in a sense promised. Certain idealized versions of life that kind of program you, these desires that you're essentially programmed to want. And then when you become an adult like I am, these desires, don't become fulfilled and you become angry and disillusioned. And then you get this sense of gratification from, something like BoJack telling me that, Hollywood is actually really just like a tar pit, a vapid tar pit, or Rick and Morty saying that, there is no meaning to the universe, just constantly undercutting any attempt at building meaning, whether through relationships or through, laws or structures or anything like that. And so that's how I see it. I think I see it as just, it's a fashionable thing. We're in a state of mind where breaking down the previous structures is gratifying to us because we ourselves have had our desires ripped from us. But anyway, I want to go back to the game. How did you feel about the gameplay? One of the things, I always just thought the game was too easy.
You're not alone. A lot of people felt like that. A lot of the blogs I was reading, a lot of the well, that's all I can say. It did feel kind of easy. The mechanics were pretty simple. But it was like hard in the wrong way. Like it was hard because of those parts that I was talking about where you're just trudging along and it's glitching. But in terms of the combat, I mean, you can really dodge, mash circle, hold R1. Well, and I was talking about this with my companion Jeff, with whom I was playing the game, and okay, this might have just been us trying to make everything about the game like super fucking profound. But we it's sort of because ultimately you're supposed to feel kind of bad for killing these robots, or for all of this stuff is not supposed to feel good and productive and wonderful. It's supposed to kind of feel shitty. We thought that maybe some of the ease of the combat was because they don't need you to have it be super difficult to kill this person, right? What they need is for you to feel bad that you've killed them. So you have to go to these processes over and over and over again. So in that way, it might be the case that that they were able to achieve that by not making the fights super, super, super tough, because the point isn't to like really just have achieved this super powerful fight. The point is actually to kind of have this experience of killing someone and then realizing, oh shit, I shouldn't have killed them, or like maybe they're worth more than that. So
although I've heard if you play it on hard, it becomes more.
It does become a lot hard, but I mean, I think not sufficiently harder.
So I'm probably reaching way beyond my depth here, but I understand that. Does the game become more Kierkegaardian if you play it on hard? Because like, isn't Kierkegaard's the one who suggests that life ought to be hard in order for us to make meaning and make that leap of faith?
Maybe it becomes more Kierkegaardian. Or Pascal sort of also has a similar line that like life's just really crappy and humans are crappy, and so if you play it on hard, it's just kind of like what you deserve.
Yeah,
right?
let's talk about Pascal for a second. The character, he seems to definitely be the most central Philosopho boss or whatever that you continue to revisit. And then in the video we brought up that, for most of the game he's very different than his philosophical counterpart, whereas most of the bosses that we've been talking about seem to have a pretty clear one-to-one relationship. Why do you think that, and I know that later we talk about that in the end he has kind of more of this legit Pascal change, but I guess why do you think Pascal the philosopher became a central NPC? Why did they choose him? I'm sure there are plenty of other pessimist philosophers that could have done what Pascal did at the end. Like it could have been a Schopenhauer or something.
Honestly, it confused me too.
Yeah.
I don't really know why they chose Pascal for that. In fact, he was one of the harder ones when I was writing the script.
Yeah.
As I was, researching Pascal and reading Pascal's works and thinking like, what is going on right now? This does not seem like the Pascal that is in this that is in the game. And to be honest, it only kind of seems like the Pascal that we end up with, the skeptic at the end. So I don't know, maybe there's someone who has more insight into it than me. Other than that, Pascal was a religious thinker, right, and a philosopher. And so there is something interesting about Pascal being this political religious leader for this whole town and him having this very particular role, and the turn with him being pessimistic or optimistic initially and then pessimistic. Right, if you just put a pessimist in there the whole time, it wouldn't have really functioned as well. You needed this dramatic event to happen in this shift. Maybe it's even suggesting that like Pascal might have been a happier person if, he'd lived, like something might have happened to Pascal which made him so darn, upset and angry.
Sure.
And so, I mean, I don't really know. I'm just wildly speculating, but Pascal is a weird one. Yeah. But he actually, I neglected to mention this earlier, but that's my second favorite moment in the game. Besides the red shirts, the one where Pascal comes back in and the children are dead, and you have to make the decision to kill him or erase him.
Right.
That was super, super, because right, he's also, and we think we say this in the video, he's also been the kind of progenitor of like liberalism in the show, right? And of like living together in community and education and like all of these things that we think of as being part of the like liberal ideal that we really rest on and think, oh, that's comforting, and like I'm glad to know that there are good people around. And then when he's like, no, just kill me, it's another way of sort of saying like, here's these ideals that we kind of share that you recognized as being significant and antithetical to the warlike structure of the rest of your engagements, and now that's gone too, and now you have to kill this one guy who represented that.
Now correct me if I'm wrong, but this transition for Pascal happens after he reads Nietzsche. That is what motivates his transformation, right?
Which transformation?
From him to the pacifist to the guy who kills kids.
No,
it isn't.
No, he doesn't kill kids. So what happens is the machines are threatening to kill. Machines are threatening to kill the children, and they're like inside this big building. And Pascal says, I'm going to forfeit my pacifism, and I'm going to go out and I'm going to fight this huge Engels robot.
Oh, okay, I see.
Right. And he goes and he does that and he kills him. And that's again through like another very tedious, like slow battle where you think like, come on, why aren't you like, hitting him faster? We know that, he's going to win.
The two big giants.
The two big giants in the ocean. Yeah. So you finally get this other guy, and Pascal's like, oh crap, I just killed this guy and I don't feel really good about that, but at least I saved the kids. And then he goes in and all the children have killed themselves. basically out of fear and anxiety.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I'm not remembering right.
And it's at that point when he sort of realizes that maybe his whole sort of the whole thrust of it, he just can't cope. He's been reaching for this certain kind of life, and suddenly all of the villagers are eating each other, and now he finally escaped and got these kids out, and they're too afraid and anxious, so they just kill themselves. And so really, like, all of his life's goals and his whole life's meaning is just stripped from him in that one moment.
Right.
And he kind of collapses and isn't sure really what to do. And so then it's incumbent upon you to choose his future, his fate.
But him reading Nietzsche is some sort of paradigm shift for him. That wasn't just a shout out, because I remember it happens late in the game.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe I don't really remember what he said immediately right after Nietzsche. I mean, right after he was reading Nietzsche, he said some random line, and I don't remember what it was off the top of my head right now. But whether or not it was a paradigm shift, sort of generally, the moment that makes him transition is a much finer point.
Okay.
It's not like a general theme about Nietzsche. It's like a very specific moment of death.
Do you have any ideas as to what are we meant to believe for philosophy nerds? Like, what is he reading? Is it a specific text? Does he actually quote?
Jeez, I don't remember.
No,
I don't remember.
Yeah, no, it's a very fine detail.
I can't remember if he is the one who's reading Zaspoke Zarathustra, or
is
if
it
that's
that one? Okay.
Or if that's the one that is quoted from several times throughout the
I see.
game. So maybe he's reading that one, or maybe it's another one.
And I don't remember. Where does he get the book? It just shows
you
up?
You get it for him. I think you get it for him, right? So some of your quests are like to go back and forth between like the village and the trading post. And Pascal keeps requesting books. And so some of the books that you get him, I think you get him this book.
I see.
If I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
And it could be.
Just want to make sure the moral of the story is don't give people books.
Yeah, exactly. Never read. That's what we were trying to say.
Cool, guys. For those of you just joining, this is Wisecrack Edition Extra, which you can only get at wisecrackplus.com. Join us if you want to hear more conversations like the one I'm having with our writer and researcher, Rebekah, if you want deeper dives into the properties that we cover and think really, really hard about. Is there anything else you want to bring up, Rebekah? Is any other things about the game that you find super interesting that we didn't get to talk about yet?
I mean, I don't think so, Jer. We have talked so much about this game. We've covered everything. I really feel like we covered a lot of it.
Tell the audience what you're playing now, and if they like this kind of exploration of philosophy in games, what else should they play?
So I really liked. I just finished The Last Guardian, which we talked a little bit about earlier. I really, really we talked about it here too. I really, really highly recommend. It's a relationship between a young boy and a dog, cat, bird creature, and I think so. A lot of the philosophy that I do is environmental philosophy, and I work on philosophy of biology, and I work on animals a lot. And so this game, its fundamental feature is a relationship between a young boy and an animal, and you have no communication, right? But you're just kind of striving to figure out how to make your way through this maze where you're both trapped together. And it's a very profound and beautiful experience. So I highly recommend that one. And then another one, actually by the same writers and producers, is Shadow of the Colossus, which was just totally rebuilt and remade. And it is now, it's exceptional. It's gorgeous. And that's another one I think that is really profound and pretty philosophical. You are engaged in a pretty nasty quest, a very nasty and brutal quest against creatures that really don't resemble most of the monsters, those sort of like unambiguously evil individuals that you typically fight. They're these beautiful, gentle, large beings that you're killing for some reason that's like not totally clear, and you're basically just following the rules of this voice, hoping for a certain outcome at the end, and it's just you and a horse. And that's another really great game. And so, yeah, that's all I've had time to play right now. But they're both excellent games. And I'm hoping that I can get Jared to let me write about one of them. So if you want to write in and help us with that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, send us your requests. And my final question is, do you have a favorite game of all time?
Oh, my gosh. A favorite game of all time.
I hate to just drop that on you.
Yeah. You know, I would actually have to say that it's NIER.
Okay.
Because it's the game that I would just unequivocally recommend to anybody who wanted to play a game. And I think you can get the most kind of bang for your buck out of that one. Like it's fully charged and really tight and dense, and and it's just so compelling.
Yeah.
It's just so compelling. I think, it's because of the thing about Nietzsche, right, is that he didn't just say the God is dead and now like everybody for himself, right? He did have certain structures of meaning that came after that. I don't think the game necessarily portrays all of those, except for the yesing. I don't think it gets at them all. But I think that game really does provide, right, like this goal of empathy and compassion and community. I think those really are, for me, personal philosophical values that I think ought to be an alternative to the kind of other structures of the warlike game. And so I think that game really gets you to those in a very organic way that frankly even a lot of philosophy can't do. Like you could read some of that philosophy and it's not going to be as powerful or as life-changing as like reading or watching one of those games would be. So
yeah, I think that experiencing and doing philosophy through video games is super exciting.
It is.
And even as a very distinct experience from cinema.
Yes, absolutely.
Especially like us talking about, us making us feel the drudgery of existence.
Yes,
by,
absolutely.
Like you can't really, I guess
you can't achieve that other ways.
Yeah, you can't achieve that in a video game, or I'm sorry, in a movie or a TV show. I guess you could, but that would just get really expensive. Imagine if there was a movie, if there was a movie of just 30 minutes of boredom, just to. I feel like those movies do exist.
They do exist, and
but they're not as fun as NIER.
Yeah, there are a lot of books like that too.
Infinite Jest.
No, but the
no one's
King's,
read it. No one's actually finished.
I've read it twice.
It? Wow.
So there, yeah. So no,
that's amazing.
It's something like his last book that was David Foster Wallace's last book that was published posthumously, like The King's something, is much more explicitly about boredom, and it's like some guy sitting in an office for like the whole book. And I haven't read that one yet.
Bastard.
Yeah, I haven't read that one. So yeah, there are thinkers who do it in the book form.
Speaking of which, we're thinking about doing a video about troll auteurs.
Oh.
And I wanted to focus it on, maybe David Foster Wallace would be one, but I wanted to focus on Hideo Kojima and Lars von Trier.
Oh, yeah.
People who just love to just put the middle finger to the audience.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that'd be a fun video.
That would be really fun. Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, guys. Well, that's it for this Wisecrack Edition Extra. A reminder that if you're listening to us on YouTube Live, if you'd like to hear more of this, hit us up at wisecrackplus.com, which is our Patreon. And if you support us, then you can hear more of these deeper dives into the properties that we cover. So I want to thank Rebekah for coming by the office. She's here for spring break in LA. It's our first time meeting, and it's been wonderful.
It has been wonderful.
To see you in the flesh.
Simply wonderful. Thanks, Jared.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. And we'll see you next time. Ciao. Bye-bye.